Working Cows Podcast, episode 349. This episode is brought to you by Ranch Right. This episode is also brought to you by the South Dakota Grassland Initiative.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag Studios, and this episode is brought to you by Ranch Right.
Does a year's worth of tax prep stand between you and being able to send things to your accountant? Are you tired of email after email asking for documents that you don't know how to find? Are you wondering exactly how much money you're going to owe the IRS this year and have no clue how to even start to figure that out? We've been there, but you don't have to. Hire Ranch Right today and know where your business stands. After all, taxes are a part of life, but Ranch Right helps you with data entry, bookkeeping, gives you reports that you can make sense of, and helps with a realistic outlook of what your business needs this tax season. Visit www.ranchright.llc today and cross tax prep off your list.
Very excited to be joined today by David Bahnsen. David is an asset manager, has worked for many of the big asset managing hedge funds throughout the years, and he's written a new book called Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life. And I really wanted to talk to him today about how do we really get all of the meaning that we possibly can out of our work, and what does it mean to get all the meaning that we possibly can out of our work. So I encourage you to stick around for this whole interview. Very, very good topic and subject, and really from a different perspective than maybe you've ever heard before. And I really am excited for this conversation with David Bahnsen. David, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
I really appreciate the concept of the book, which I think as we're recording this, maybe releases today or tomorrow. As people are listening to it, will have released last week, but they can go and get a copy of it at the show notes page for today at workingcows.net/349. workingcows.net/349 is the show notes page for today, so people can get a copy of the book there. But where I'd like to start is kind of a high-level examination of what the fact that we are created in the image of God says about us as workers and as creators and some of those things.
Well, you know, one of the things I think is so easy exegetically about determining what it means when the Bible says that we're created in the image of God as it pertains to work is that so much of it was actually just literally spelled out for us. That in Genesis chapter 1, you know, there's a lot of theological magnificence that one can extract from just the basic sentence of us being made in the image of God. And the fact that we know God viewed his making of Adam and Eve as very good, that there was this particular dignity attached to the human person that was not applied to the rest of creation, and particularly the rest of living creation, that there was a dominion that God set in place explicitly over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, that mankind holds. And so that dignity and that particular value that God made mankind with a soul that can never die. These things, I think, are really special, beautiful lessons in Genesis 1. But when you ask what it means in terms of work, verses 26 to 28 provide a really detailed synopsis just right out of the gate, that we are to cultivate the earth, that we are to steward the creation, that we are to care for it, that we are to fill it, multiply it, grow it. So there was a growth mandate. Theologians are fond of talking about a dominion mandate, and that is black and white, true and undebatable. But I think there's something to be said for the concept of a growth mandate as well. That those tilling the fields, that those in a different era of civilization, working in factories and offices, that all of this is part of the human mandate to grow the creation God gave us.
And there's a sense in which we are entrusted with this creation to improve on it, to make it to make it better, or at least to bring it under our dominion and use that responsibly. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would, and I think that the improving it is not merely something that we are ethically tasked to do, but creatively tasked to do. That it is, I argue in the book, and forgive me for using kind of a fancy word, I just think this concept is really important, that we're ontologically made for this, meaning the very being of our humanity is connected to this requirement, this created purpose of improving upon the culture. Now, of course, in a more agrarian context, it was really very evident that what benefits came from tilling the fields, from planting, from farming, that these things agriculturally yielded results and helped to create the vegetation, the food, a lot of, we could call it surviving, but it also involved thriving. You got better taste and better lifestyle out of it. The fact that technology has gotten better over the years, and perhaps that's a massive understatement, but it in no way negates my point, that from the invention of the wheel to fire to digital computing thousands of years later, we are basically all living out a created purpose that, to the language you just used, involves improving upon the creation. The language I like to use economically is that we're extracting value from the raw materials. And of course, there is an added component here that involves ideas, involves the unique ability of human beings to reason and think. And so the analogy I use so many times that really could apply to so many other devices and inventions besides the iPhone. But because so many people hold an iPhone, I point out that they're not holding anything that physically didn't exist thousands of years ago, that the raw materials that go into a phone, from rubber to plastic to metal to whatnot, were all there. What made the iPhone possible, what made a tractor possible, what made a steam engine possible, was the extraction of value from raw materials by impugning human ideas and ingenuity.
Yep. And I think that along with that, it takes a fundamentally different way of looking at the world to understand this, because a lot of people will look at the world in a way that says that man is an evolved accident in a series of evolved accidents. Whereas if we look at ourselves as created in the image of God, ontologically, the being, the way we were made, our very being is about this work. And then teleologically too, right? The point of our being, the point of us being here is to do this work. That is a totally fundamentally different way of seeing who we are. And so then we're not trying to get back to a point where man didn't exist. We're not trying to get back to some utopian past where man hadn't screwed things up. We are trying to use ingenuity and creativity to make the things that exist now better.
Well, that's exactly right. And this, you can't really have this conversation without connecting it to a sort of worldview of economics. Because when Adam Smith, in the advent of the classical economic school, referred to this as a way by which people can serve their neighbor and also advance their self-interest and create a virtuous cycle out of those things, that's really what he was describing is a process that began from the very Garden of Eden. And in a more organized society and one with a greater degree of social cohesion and social organization, we intuitively understand this, that we can work in a way that it meets human needs, and in so doing, create a better life for ourselves. This is at the very heart of a market economy. And of course, it's the reason for the great enrichment of the last several hundred years. It's the reason that the world has experienced not only an escape from abject poverty in so many parts of the world, but a just fundamental, totally different understanding of quality of life that makes, not yesterday's, but 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the billionaires of that society look poor compared to the quality of life that we're able to enjoy today. And all of that's a byproduct of this process that we're both describing.
Right. Well, in a sense then, David, we could say that the iPhone came from farming, because if you're able to create more than you need, then you're freeing up somebody else to go and work and think and create in a place that isn't the farm field, right? And so this division of labor becomes a part of this discussion too, and an important part of it, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And division of labor is another concept that was born out of the advent of classical economics, and it was really not thought possible in medieval times. The division of labor, mutual cooperation, but a subset of this, it's connected, adjacent, but maybe not identical, is the concept of specialization. And I think that's what you're referring to, that we can produce more than we need for ourselves, thereby free other people to do things that they want that then benefits us or another group. And you get this dynamic reality of economic activity. It also gives birth to specialization, whereby people that want to sing can sing because someone else is farming for them. And somebody else who wants to build with their hands can do so because someone else is out singing and making the noise and the art and the beautiful things that help society grow and prosper and develop a higher quality of life. So the specialization then allowed people to do the things they love more and to do them better. And so it was an incredible discovery that obviously is front and center in some of the prosperity we've enjoyed the last couple hundred years.
Yep. I was recently involved in a discussion online, and it was actually somebody who I don't think would profess to be a believer, a follower of Jesus. And they were saying, well, if you're a creationist, if you're somebody who believes that creation was created by God, then you should be, involved in making things better, or, you should at least be grieved by the lack of or the loss of biodiversity in the last couple of centuries. And my response was this. I said, all worldviews contain ditches. Some ditches are bigger than others. The ditch of rejecting oneism, which I don't think I have to define that term for you, is dualism, right? For example, seeing a disconnect between the sacred and the secular. To say it another way, not seeing any connection between our faith and our work. With regard to the original post, not seeing that we will be held to account for how we use all the resources entrusted to us, resources like people and breath and treasure and soil. Those who abuse those resources will be held to an account, but those who led them to their dualism will be held to a greater account. And I quote James 3:1 there. So would you agree with that statement, that we're going to be held to account for how we use the resources entrusted to us, but then also those people who have led us down this path of not seeing any connection between our faith and our work are also going to be held maybe even to a higher account for the way that they have taught us to think about work?
Yeah, I mean, I not only agree, I think it is paramount to understanding all of these different concepts. We will be held to a higher account. the stakes are significant, and they're not significant for a political reason or an agendized reason. It speaks to an anthropological truth that God holds mankind in such a elevated and dignified way that to interfere with this process, to get in the way of it, to disdain it, impedes human flourishing. It cuts into the access to the good life, to shalom that we are created for. And so I think the stakes are very high, and I think that totally disconnected from any particular political or even economic way of thinking. I think this comes down to a very important spiritual reality.
Mm. Yeah, can you flesh that out a little bit more about what that very important spiritual reality is? Just the fact that we're created in the image of God, or something beyond that?
Well, I think that we are created in the image of God, but that the implications of us being created in the image of God speak to us having characteristics that we share with him. And at the same time, J.I. Packer used to talk about the transcendent and the immanent. There are things we do not share with God. And so God's omnipresence, God's omnipotence, omniscience are not characteristics we share. And God's ability to create ex nihilo, out of nothing, is not something that we have the capacity for. But what we do have as a result of being made in the image of God, something that the animal kingdom does not have, is the ability to co-create with him, not out of nothing, but from the things he made. And so to the extent that we limit a market economy, that we limit access to the natural resources of the world from which so much value is to be extracted, to the extent that we discourage the work, the productivity, the labor, the creativity, the innovating, that is itself the verb or verbs of all of these things, then we are impeding God's created design, his order for the universe. And it is an order that comes from a genuine love God has for the people he created. I think that these things are inherently spiritual, divinely appointed, and create quite an ethical responsibility for all of us.
So what you're saying is that people who have a day job like me, where I am a pastor of a local church, are not the only ones with meaningful work. Is that what you're saying, David?
Well, I am, and it's really sad that it needs to be said, because this was something that I think, by the way, even before the Protestant Reformation, but especially out of the Protestant Reformation, but I actually believe to a certain degree in certain elements of properly understood Catholic social thought as well. But if you just want to start this train of thought at the Reformation, this was something that was just completely understood, taken for granted. The notion that we have meaningful work to do, and that this does not apply only to the minister working in that more specifically ecclesiastical context, that all of God's creation is doing a work that is important in his kingdom. This was table stakes for Protestant social theory. This was just basic tenets of, I think, post-Reformation understanding, and how far we've come, the way in which certain elements, I think, of pietism, fundamentalism, has created a sort of separatist understanding. And yes, that word dualist is very important. Distinguishing between the sacred and the secular is a distinctly non-Protestant thing to do, a non-reformed thing to do. And it's something I want to fight with every ounce of breath in my body. Now, there's a lot of vehicles by which this dualism needs to be defeated. There's a lot of vehicles by which dualism surfaces. But the lowest hanging fruit by far is in this discussion of vocation, calling, work, a theology of work, because it is the most culturally prominent impulse is to view our work as somehow separate from the really significant things we do in life. And that's the entire reason why I wrote the book.
Yeah, very good. And I think that kind of what you're talking about as well is that this isn't a zero-sum game. Like there isn't a point at which we're going to run out of resources. And I think that one of the things that speaks to me most loudly about that is the stream of agriculture that I run in, which is called regenerative agriculture. And the fact that we are capable of improving the land. The land has, there are more microorganisms in a tablespoon of healthy soil than there are people on the planet. And just 5 years ago, when I started this podcast, they were saying there are more microorganisms in 2 handfuls of healthy soil than there are people on the planet. So we're learning so much more about what's going on under the soil, and the fact that healthy soil is more productive and it produces more nutrient-dense food that you actually have to eat less of, and you're healthier by doing it. All these kinds of things speak to me of the fact that we have nowhere near tapped the productive potential of this landscape that we are on. And that's to say nothing of all of the landscapes that we have maybe overused throughout history, and what this kind of agriculture says about them, that we can go back to those places and make them better and regenerate them and see them come back into productive capacities as well. And so I just like to give you an opportunity to talk about that zero-sum thinking. There's not enough to go around. We're dealing with a scarcity of resources, and we need to probably embark on some mass depopulation campaign or whatever that might look like, depending on who's talking. But do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. It's interesting because I feel convicted in the sense that there's a particular example I'm going to get to in a second that is kind of universally understood. I use it all the time, and I think it probably has the most broad and democratic appeal in making the point you're making. And yet it occurs to me as you're talking that for someone like myself, who doesn't have a lot of background or experience or knowledge in matters that are more agricultural or agrarian or rural for that matter, that there's probably a million examples that never see light of day. Peak oil is the great example of the last 50 years. And zero sum is part of this. I make a category distinction between the zero sum fallacy, because it doesn't only speak to natural resources. Wealth gets created just simply from the trading of candy bars on a playground, because some people like certain candy bars more than others, and the ability to have that choice and up the ante creates greater societal happiness and value. And so just merely from free exchange of incumbent products, goods, services, we can create wealth. But to the extent that we're able to make more, which is what you're referring to, and make better, which is what you're referring to, we can exponentially make more wealth. But they said we were going to run out of oil. And as far as I'm concerned, they may very well have been right. I have no idea if at the time the data they were looking at and the science they were doing was cogent or not, but I'm willing to just pretend it was. What they didn't know and couldn't know and chose not to know and should have known the possibility of was the fact that there was the ability to go get more, to create more, to enhance our processes. As it turns out, both horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing led to discovery of more oil and the ability to get to more oil. But I have no doubt that what you're referring to in the mineral space, agricultural space, contains tons of other examples of the same thing. The freeze frame myth is the term I like better than zero sum describing this, because people do economics or do policy analysis all the time by assuming that certain conditions are frozen, whether it be demographics or commodity, as opposed to understanding that those time and place circumstances can and do change. And so if we are to have a dynamic understanding of God's creation, we must have a dynamic understanding of these things at play in the market, in the culture, in the ecology. And so in that sense, the world of agriculture is a constant reaffirmation of this created truth.
Yeah. Yep. Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, the South Dakota Grassland Initiative. Where would South Dakota's beloved cattle, pheasants, ducks, and other wildlife be without the grasslands? How would grassland loss affect your neighbors, local community, and the economy? We want to work with you to ensure the heritage of the Great Plains grasslands is everlasting. The South Dakota Grasslands Initiative asks you to join us for the South Dakota Grasslands Summit, taking place in Oklahoma, South Dakota, March 18th and 19th. Speakers will address the status of South Dakota's grasslands in relation to ecology, economics, market forces, and social value, sharing both threats and opportunities that exist. Learn how you can be a part of the solution to keep South Dakota grasslands and grassland heritage thriving. For more information, go to www.sdgrassinitiative.org/summit and join us March 18th and 19th, 2024 in Oklahoma, South Dakota for the 2024 South Dakota Grassland Summit. So I'd like to kind of circle back around to the discussion that we started with, and really we've been just fleshing that out since we started, but also to discuss this idea around the fact that when God created us, He created us for a purpose, and He created us to an end, to, as the Westminster Confession would say, to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. So we had a point, we had a reason for being here, and also for the creation care aspects that we've been discussing. But it wasn't that He created us without any instructions and without a pattern that He set in place for us. And that pattern is 6 days of labor, 1 day of rest. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you think about those things, first of all, and maybe apply it to the broader context of American workers and what you see going on there? And then maybe we'll zero in and apply it maybe more specifically to my audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the issue that we observe right now with American workers is a very rapid move away from not only the biblical truth and biblical message that I'm trying to recover and restore here, but from our own story, from our own DNA as a country, that the general instinct in the American ethos was one of celebrating productivity, celebrating entrepreneurship, celebrating risk-taking, and benefiting from these industrial and productive activities that extracted value from God's creation and enhanced the goods and services available to humankind for the better quality of life. That these things were fruits of our own labor, that there was character out of work. And look, it hasn't been purged from our DNA. I mean, the general character of the American populace is still wildly supportive of work, but they've done a really good job chipping away at it. There's been a marginal success in reprogramming a lot of it. And generationally, I fear that the regression picks up steam in the years and decades ahead, just simply because generationally, I think a lot of the ethos that I'm trying to embody here is held within some older generations that will, over time die off. Gen Z is kind of to be determined, in my opinion. There is a lot of the prior generation, what they refer to as the millennial or Gen Y generation, that Gen Z has rejected. And one of the things I hope they'll reject is a culture of entitlement, a spirit of entitlement, resentment against how hard mom and dad worked. That there will be a kind of recapturing of a mentality that sees character in work, sees value in the worker. And even though the book is predominantly focused on the spiritual priorities here, the cultural message, the theological beauties I want to see recovered, really a lot of pleading with the pulpits to change their framing of the message here, which I think has done a great deal of damage. But to the extent that there is a message here in the policy realm, in terms of the world of public policy, I think that we have got to resist this migration to a European fondness for non-work, of longer breaks, of more days off, of more holidays, of this and that. We have a lot of benefits, luxuries the prior generations did not have. We're able to have more margin, better quality of life. I think all of that's wonderful. But celebrating a lower participation rate of the workforce itself is entirely backwards. And pursuing decisions that will time and time again err on the side of more leisure and less work and productivity is a major mistake. The sky does not fall when we do this in America, because we are living off of a really rich base of borrowed capital, of inherited capital. But that will be depleted.
Yeah. And when we see lower participation in the workforce, we see more people having to turn to other streams of income, namely, and at least in my mind, namely the government. I don't know if that's what you're thinking of. But we see more and more dependence on a centrally planned economy, and we've never seen that work well anywhere. It always fails, and that's kind of back to our earlier discussion, where we've got to have somebody trying to figure out, what do these people need to eat, how much money do they need, that never works. So we should stop trying it.
Yeah, and I think I should point out, even though I don't really disagree, I mean, as a matter of technicality, I think you're right that oftentimes the sender of the money that someone who is not working is receiving may have a government logo on the envelope, or it may have a government origination on the wire or ACH from which the money comes. But even then, it isn't coming from government revenue or income, because the government doesn't have any revenue or income.
Right. Yeah.
All that they have is the portion that they receive in taxes collected from those who are working, who are producing. And whether that be from investment income or income on labor, taxes on labor income, or taxes on capital, whether it be at an individual level or a corporate or entity level, all of that is irrelevant. There is productive work being done that generates income. The government takes some of that, but all they can be is an intermediary in distributing. So even the largesse that somebody not working receives, they may have a middleman of the government, but even that has to come from somebody else who is working. And it's not, I'm not trying to make a particular argument against the welfare state. I have arguments against it. But look, people can have reasonable disagreements about what level of social safety net we want to have and not have. And we could talk about food stamps and then you could even talk about the Social Security program for our seniors and Medicare. Regardless, all I'm trying to get right here is where that revenue comes from. It has to be from somebody who is working. And when we want to encourage transfer payments that are disconnected from a work requirement, I do not merely argue that what we're doing is unaffordable. I argue that what we're doing is unfair to the recipients of the money.
Because there's dignity in work.
That's right. Because we're stripping them of their self-worth, of their purpose, of their God-created purpose. You cannot live a happy and meaningful life when you're fully relying on the largesse of others. You have to contribute to your own lot. And this is a created truth.
Right. Exactly. That's what I was going to say. And why is it that you cannot do that? Because you were created for this purpose. You were created for this end, right? And here's another thing that I want to make sure we clarify that you're not necessarily saying. You're not necessarily saying that somebody needs to spend 6 days working at the office, whatever their shift is, 6 to 4, 9 to 5, whatever their shift is. Just because you're working at the office, or just because you're not working at the office, doesn't mean you're not bringing dominion. Doesn't mean you're not making things better in your own home, in your backyard. Would you agree with that? Or do you think it needs to be said, no, you should work 6 days a week in the office for whatever industry you're in?
Yeah, I most certainly am not saying that it normatively must be those things, 6 hours in the office or on the farm or in the factory or in the warehouse or in the classroom. The fact that there may be some diversification, I do believe, though, that to the extent one has the freedom to do some of their work in the office, and then on a Saturday in the modern economy, we can donate more time to activities with family or activities with our church or yard work or whatever the case may be. I do think we should do so with the gratitude for the fact that the only reason that work week went from 6 to 5 days in a more vocational or professional context is because of the miracles of modern capitalism. that I don't want to bite the hand that feeds us here. And I think that there might be times, particularly for entrepreneurs, that sometimes their 6th day is going to need to be spent in the office. And there's all kinds of different situations that I can't be privy to.
Right.
That's why I say this isn't normative. When my kids, who are now 19, 16, and 13, but when they were, 6, 3, and 1, I took my little guys into the office with me Saturday. And they'd play and we'd do things. I'd put on cartoons. I'd get a little extra work done, give my wife a break, and then I'd take them out to lunch and things like that. And you can do that for certain ages, and other people don't want to do that or don't need to do that. I don't have any opinion in the specifics. I have a strong opinion in the principle. The principle is 6 days shalt thou work, and that there is a day of rest given, which models the very structure God had for himself, working 6 and resting 1. And to the extent that we have certain freedoms and privileges with how we divide up the 6, I have no legalistic aspirations here. What I do want, though, is for the other side to stop their legalistic aspirations. That where there is someone, let's say they're in early formative stage of their career and they do have to go work Saturdays a lot. I would like us to stop throwing bricks at that guy or gal. And yet, as their own freedom and situation matures and develops, and they have the ability to do more division of labor, more activity outside of the office, I certainly support that too. So I'm probably giving an answer that serves to satisfy exactly nobody, but I'm convinced I'm giving the right answer.
Very good. And I think more to my audience, maybe some of the people that listen to this on a regular basis are sitting there thinking, what kind of lazy person only works 6 days a week? We work 7 days a week around here, sun up to sundown, so let's talk about that. That's also part of the principle, right? 6 days you shall labor, on the 7th day you should rest. So can you talk to me about the importance of rest, and speak to me about that?
Well, my late father was a Christian intellectual, and he was a pastor. I mean, he was an ordained pastor, had his own congregation. He was a shepherd, and he had a lot of opinions about the Sabbath. And it's not exactly a new controversy in Christian theology that people have different opinions about how this concept of the Sabbath ought to be lived out. And I probably have some opinions of my own, but they're not material to what we're talking about here now. The principle that I would feel is very important and very material is the concept of resting 1/7 of the time. And when people get into some of the particulars about, does it have to be Sunday or can it be a different day, and what can you do and can't do, and is it sundown to sundown or sun up to sundown, all of those things, there's room for people to discuss it. It's just that people already have discussed it. They already are. And so I'll let everyone kind of food fight over all that stuff. But the principle to me is that God had a certain structure, and then he not only made the world that way and told us he did, but then he asked us to honor that pattern and specifically rationalized the commandment around the creation example. So I'm not connecting the dots here hermeneutically. I'd be happy to do so. I'm just reading the verbatim of Scripture, that it was the creation account that served as the basis for the fourth commandment. And I also know the gospel account is very clear that man was not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man. This is a gift God gave us.
Yep.
So when we don't take advantage of that adequate rest, then first of all, I believe it makes us lazier. So people go, well, rest is lazy. No, I think not taking rest makes us lazier, because it makes us more susceptible to lower output Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, So we need to recharge our batteries so that we could be on our game the most. You think about like a professional athlete, and if they don't rest their body, are they going to be able to play 100% in the next game? I mean, this is just sort of biological to some degree.
Right.
But I think the principle is what I would want to fight and defend. And how that applies to the realities of a farmer is not something I pretend to have a lot of expertise in. How they're able to get the rest that they need, perhaps with shift rotation, family division of labor, who takes on what on certain days of the week. I would imagine where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. There is. And the confessions and the scriptures speak to that, right? If there's an ox in the ditch, you go pull it out on the Sabbath, right? You take care of those things. So,
yes.
So I guess I missed an opportunity when I was talking to Sean Baker a couple of weeks ago, and he was bringing up the fact that our guts seem to be adapted to eat a lot of red meat. And he said that's probably an evolutionary thing. And I missed an opportunity to say, or it could just be the kindness of God, right? That he made our guts work with red meat because red meat is delicious. And so, this is another example of that, right? I don't want to miss this opportunity to say it's just the kindness of God that he built into it, one day of rest for us. Do you see something else going on there, something deeper going on there about rest and the necessity of it beyond that?
Well, again, I think that the secret things belong to the Lord, and I think whatever his agenda was, the portion of it that I know is what I'm able to speak to, and what I know is that it modeled his own operating model, and that he made us to be like him. And so there does seem to me to be a lot of empirical support and kind of time-tested historical support for the idea of people getting that day of rest. I also think it's interesting that more and more studies seem to confirm that sometimes the rest is not the same when you try to divvy it up, like let me get 4 hours of it over 4 different days versus a real whole day where you can kind of disconnect. And I don't think that this particular manifestation or impediment, I should say, would necessarily be one I would imagine exist in a rural context as much as an urban one. But I think one of the things that's made it very difficult is people will say, I'm taking rest today. I'm not going to the office. I'm just, I'm avoiding meeting with clients or whatever their white collar job requires. But the technological connectivity makes it very difficult. Because if you're still checking your phone all day and you're still on your email and your text and this and that and the other, being unplugged, meaning resting, is much harder than it used to be without some sort of will to do so. And yet I very much agree that there is some sense in which the blessing of it we have to take on faith, because it really is a blessing.
Yeah, I live 65 miles from the nearest stoplight, and I've got an iPhone too, so I've got a smartphone as well. So we're just as connected by and large out here.
Yeah.
So I would like to.
And I didn't mean that that people in a rural context didn't have access to iPhones. What I mean is that there is some sense in which, like, hopefully the work isn't living off of it, where certain office context, that is sort of the grind of the job. You know what I mean?
Yep. No, yeah, I wasn't taking offense at it all.
Good.
So I'd like to capture some bonus content here with you. So I wanted to wrap up this portion of the conversation by just giving you an opportunity to speak to some of the things that you think are important themes in the book that I may have missed. Again, the book is full-time, and that's the title of the book. It'll be linked in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/349. Highly encourage everybody to get a copy of it. Believer, unbeliever, I think there's a lot in there for people to really gain something from it. So, but are there themes that we haven't touched on from the book that you really think are some of your favorite themes to discuss?
Well, one of the pieces that I really enjoyed about the book, and I don't know how familiar the listeners may be with this idea of the halftime model, but some form of viewing the Christian life where you do a certain amount of work to an age, and then after that you can really focus on being significant. That then your life crosses a point where you had a certain amount of success, you achieved certain things, you did certain things, but then now we have the opportunity to move or convert that into something more significant because we're going to volunteer at church more, we're going to mentor, be a big brother or what have you. I really believe that even with good intentions that is often embedded in that theology, it is very dangerous. It is very dualistic, and it fails to realize the significance of the totality of our lives to God. That we do not do work at 23 that means nothing so that we can do work at 63 that does mean something. That the work we do at 63 and 23 matters. And for that matter, a lot of people at 63 should probably still be doing the work they did at 23. Maybe they're have less body and mind that they used to have, but they have a lot more expertise and experience. And those things matter. So I'm very critical of a Christianized dualism that wants to view our lives as a distinction between success and significance. And I'm very critical of a secularized understanding of retirement itself. I do not believe that there's an age at which we're supposed to check out of active, productive living. I frankly find the whole concept depressing. And so to the extent that we can just rethink what our lives are supposed to be about and really view God's kingdom in the way that he does, and our work for that kingdom, and pray as Jesus taught us to, that, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven, thy kingdom come. We are working in very meaningful things, whether it be on a farm or an office, a classroom, a factory, and we're doing so because we're building God's kingdom here on earth.
Right. Yep. As I said, I hope everybody can see that the book has a lot of value for people in all industries, not just in corporate office buildings in New York, but everywhere, because it's talking about created orders and the way that God made the world. And I would encourage everybody to go out and get a copy of the book, Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life by David Bahnsen. David, thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Very good stuff there with David. Really appreciate his perspective and the way that he connects our creation in God's image to drawing the ultimate meaning from our work. Coming up next week on the Working Cows podcast, very excited to be joined by the crew from Understanding Ag again, a really exciting discussion with them that I'm looking forward to. Also looking forward to releasing a bonus episode. This is episode 349, so episode 350. Episode 350 of the Working Cows podcast is going to be a panel discussion that I facilitated at the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition conference. And that panel discussion was with Glenn Elzinga, Zach Smith, Cooper Hibbard, and Jay Fuhrer. So really excited to have Jay on the podcast for the first time and in that capacity with the panel discussion with those other gentlemen. So really looking forward to that coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.